Hello everyone, my name is Musa Ahmad and I wanted my presentation to be about a story called A Free Man of Color by John Gore. This is a great story. It takes place in New Orleans in the early 1800s. This story takes us to a time when the US was not the US today and New Orleans was a land separate from everything else. Um, the main character is Jacques Cornell. He was a mulatto, meaning that he is a son of a white man and his mother was African. Now, his father was a white plantation owner. He was very wealthy. His mother was a slave and she was sold shortly after he was born, so he really never got to meet his mother. Um, Cornell became a free man after the death of his father, and he also became very wealthy, inheriting everything that he had. He was actually known as the wealthiest man of color in New Orleans, and even had his own slave, who was called Murmur. Cornell lavishes money on fantastic clothes, the latest maps. The rest of his time he spends seducing women. He was considered irresistible, especially to the women that find his money very attractive. Anyway, the story starts telling us about how a slave rebellion was underway and they took over Santo Domingo's government, which is what we know now, well, today is known as Haiti. Here, Cornell starts to see people going up against him, and slaves start to feel somewhat powerful. So he was determined to regain his status. He stages a shooting and has Murmur pretend to shoot him in a way to use sympathy. But the truth is revealed later, and that doesn't work. We also see Napoleon, who was in charge of the French military. He sends his troops to Santo Domingo to crush the attempt at independence and restore his law and order, but he fails, and most of his soldiers were killed by a disease called yellow fever, which was a disease that was spread throughout New Orleans years ago. Anyway, those rebellious slaves were shipped back to New Orleans, but Cornell was curious enough and asked to see them. So he falls into this ship and experiences a horrible nightmare, but he escapes from it eventually. While all this is going on, a major real estate deal is about to close in when Napoleon finishes France's takeover of New Orleans from Spain. But Thomas Jefferson sends a contingent to France to buy New Orleans from Napoleon, and it was immediately sold to the US. But a good bit of time passes, and Cornell learns that America now owns New Orleans and the surrounding area. Um, so that the new nation is based on the idea that now all men are created equal. So he was convinced that New Orleans has returned to its glory days and wanted to go back home. But when he arrives, he discovers that much has changed, and America, the land of the free, skin color still mattered. So he was arrested and auctioned as a slave. But before he was taken away, he and Thomas Jefferson argued over the hypocrisy of this new nation, which was based on freedom and equity. Anyway, his part ends with a new owner who takes him, and he lives as a slave for the rest of his life, and of course loses out on all his money and fortune. Um, I also wanted to share this image of a map. The blue area here is the original part of the United States. That orange area was called the Louisiana Territory. That's the area that was purchased that was part of the Louisiana Purchase. It wasn't just the state, but it was that whole entire surrounding area of New Orleans. I thought that was useful. I wanted to share this with everyone. Anyway, I think this story should be considered to be taught in literature courses because we get to learn about significant historical data, such as the Yellow Fever and the Slave Rebellion. So the Yellow Fever was something that I learned after reading this story. It was fatal. It actually wiped out 10% of the city's population. Eventually, it earned New Orleans the nickname City of the Dead. This disease is spread by mosquitoes and thrives in warm, humid places with dense population. Much like New Orleans today, actually. And then we got slavery. Slavery in New Orleans. New Orleans had the largest slave market in the U.S. But if it weren't for the slave rebellion, Louisiana wouldn't be part of the United States at all, even though it ended up expanding the slavery in the United States back then. So New Orleans had actually gone through so many changes in so little time. A European colony for decades, but then New Orleans would be part of the United States, passing in less than a month time from Spanish to French rule and sold to the United States as part of the biggest real estate deal ever. So as you can see here, it went from Spain to France and then quickly to the United States. But the story in A Free Man of Color, it was the nexus of a political, social, and historical activity. The political aspects in the story was by drawing an image of how Napoleon and the French government laid its rules. And then we have the social aspects on how people were classified and how slaves were treated. And mainly that social status was the most important thing. Finally, we have the historical aspects, which is how the Louisiana Purchase happened and how many lives changed forever after this major real estate deal. Anyway, I think this is a great story, and I really think it is worth being taught in literature courses because it shows the realistic part of New Orleans as well as enjoying a great story. Thank you very much.